Deshaun Watson, news on his case. We also have Rob Gronkowski as well announcing his retirement, plus our feature topic of the week, roster cloggers in Dynasty. That and more on the Footballguys Dynasty Show. And Jordan, starting off with the legal team, you're our correspondent in-house here for the Dynasty Show. And Deshaun Watson, 20 of 24 settled. And it feels like we're moving in the direction of having some clarity, at least on is he playing this year and how many games?
Yeah, I mean, I've been really following the projection number of how many games that he would miss. And all of our projectors have had basically him playing between 9 and 11 games, which would be somewhere in the 6 to 8 game suspension range. And I think that this news today is probably reaffirms that. I thought that there was, as we went along over the past week, 10 days or so, it had felt like the news had gotten pretty bad on the Watson front. I think more so maybe the market felt that way, right? I think there was a general unease about some of the stuff that was going on there. I don't think anything really changed all that much, but just the general feeling did maybe. But I think today, him resolving 20 of these 24 cases, I think is a sign that he's in the I need to get this over with.
He's in the red zone of clarity. He's
right.
Marching towards the end zone of at least us having an idea of what we're expecting.
Right. And here's the problem. When you actually look at and this has been a problem. We've talked about this. We've talked about this with Kareem Hunt. We've talked about this with some other players. When you actually read the personal conduct policy, I'm not sure how much of this alleged conduct he actually covers in terms of actually mandating a 6-game suspension. I mean, I was reading it today and I was kind of left dumbfounded by the fact that I don't think it covers this. This has been a hole that we've seen in this for a while. And I still think it's there. So I don't think it's a necessarily mandatory 6-game suspension like some of these other situations have had. I think there's enough uncertainty there to think that what is going to actually indeed happen will be Watson's going to use this as part of the, hey, I'm taking responsibility for what I did in some form, shape, or form, and I'm going to reach a negotiated agreement on a suspension. We've seen that with Kareem Hunt. We've seen that with some other guys. Hey, I'm just going to sort of take a suspension. I'll agree to it. The NFL doesn't want to litigate this. Watson doesn't want to litigate this, right? They kind of want to put this to bed. And this next 10 to 14 day period before the 4th of July seems like the time where that's going to happen.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of dynasty value to be had here. The overall rising tide of the Browns offense. You have Baker Mayfield, more comfort moving him. Jacoby Brissett, how much of a streaming opportunity will we have? The connection with Amari Cooper and David Njoku, two guys that relatively to their cost could be big values this year. More touchdowns for Nick Chubb. Just, again, a more robust Browns offense. And the more games of that you get, the better. Because we can see globally the Browns are underrated if Deshaun Watson is playing, as you said, if it's a 6-game suspension, if it's less than that. I mean, that is a huge boon compared to the sky is falling and he's not going to play at all, or he's going to be suspended for maybe it's partitioned down to 12 games or 10 games or something. But if it ends up being single digits, I think from where we were a while ago, or like you said, at its worst or at its most pessimistic, that would certainly be a big win at this standpoint for lineups.
Yeah. Can I ask you a question? I've been thinking a lot about this in terms of if you have 2 quarterbacks, right? If you have another elite quarterback and you have Deshaun Watson, what's your pivot away from Watson in your lineup?
I don't understand the question. The other quarterback you have? What do you mean?
I'm sorry, I sneezed, so I had to pause that. I had to mute that for a second. I'm dealing with a cold. No, so if you're looking for, I just had to get the question out and let you not know what I meant. What's the question in terms of, or what's your approach if he's out 6 games, right? And you don't have, right? Let's say you have a quarterback tandem of Patrick Mahomes and Deshaun Watson, and you go into the season and you're saying, okay, I have these 2 guys, but I'm going to be without Watson. It might be 6 weeks, it might be 8 weeks, 10 weeks, something like that. Are you going out and getting another quarterback in terms of
start
adding
one?
To that? No, in Superflex.
In Superflex. Well, if you only have 2, I mean, that's a very unlikely because I'm usually, I like to have, if I have 2 in a Superflex, I usually have others. Sure. And so I would have something going on. I mean, That's an interesting question. If he's out for, again, I think you said less than half the season or some cross section, do you float it and just go one?
Because I think that might be and I've been thinking about this a lot on the bike, of course. I come up with my crazy
that's where you do your best thinking.
Absolutely.
When your thighs are screaming.
Right. When everything's yelling at me and the voices in
Jordan,
my head are talking very loud.
What's going on?
Right,
Where's the downhill?
Right, exactly. But if your aim is to win a championship, okay, if your ultimate goal is to win a championship, I actually think the proper play is to probably float Watson, right? Float through the Watson time. And the reason for that is simple. If you take what you would spend on Derek Carr, on Kirk Cousins, on Jared Goff, on whoever the quarterback is you're going to fill
Goff in. I mean, these are pretty affordable, right? But is your theory that if you have a non-quarterback flex, is it really a big difference?
Well, if you have a non-quarterback flex, if you're playing in, if you could go into that trade and instead of picking that quarterback, you could actually pick a player. I don't know if it's an Alvin Kamara or if it's a tight end premium format, you could actually get someone that's a pretty significant score. Yeah. You could get someone even cheaper. And then ultimately what you're doing is by the time Watson gets back, you've actually added to your lineup instead of
I see what you did there.
Yeah, instead of just
someone that can still find
Watson.
Your lineup, and Watson would put them to the bench. So instead of a 6-week or 8-week fill-in, you're actually getting infinite fill-in.
Correct. You're actually adding a core asset to it and sort of floating that and just saying, all right, like maybe it cost me a half a win or something like that in the first 8 weeks. But what it's actually going to do is it's going to increase my championship equity in the long term. That's something that I'm thinking about because I have some of these spots. Again, I have guys that are sort of on the back end of it. If I've got a Goff or I might have a Geno Smith or something like that where I've got.
But not addressing it by just going, hey, if I can start a Geno or if I can start a Goff or if I, someone down, maybe I have Mayfield and who knows if he is going to start or something like that. But I almost feel like if it's 28-man roster, it might be tough. I usually use that as a threshold. But if you're into the 30s, I think just spending maybe an extra couple roster spots on backup quarterbacks and taking shots. Yep. But also I was thinking, because again, we've seen, depending on quarterback scoring and depending on who that actual option is, the low end versus another position for you, we're talking, it might be less than 5 points per game. So that really is, I mean, you're saying half a win. And I think that could be right on the mark of saying even if I'm kind of punting the super flex spot and I don't get lucky with an August injury, early September, anything that bridges the gap for free, essentially, then I think, I mean, if you supplement with just a stronger flex option or one more positional player that you make a dynasty trade instead of getting a quarterback specifically, then because you're like, well, I feel pretty good about my 2. I just don't have 2 right now. Obviously, in that 1 week where you have a bye with your other quarterback, that's going to be the pressure spot of hopefully I have somebody. Hopefully I have a backup that plays.
But and the other thing too is kind of like you said, just cycling through the backups, right? I mean, I think it's been a pretty consistent trend in the NFL. You've had 45 plus guys start a game in the NFL each year. And you just take that out, and there's a pretty good chance that you're going to.
What are you going to spend your waiver dollars on? Right? I mean, if it's super flex, unless it's 2 tight end, but still 2 tight end, a lot of people hoard backup options, to actually have good value. And so, I think if you just maybe are aggressive and be like, well, I'm going to spend 50%. If I get clarity in early September on a guy that could start and be the whole gap, or at least have the potential to do that, I'll spend relatively big, and say that's going to be my fix. And so, I think that's a good idea. Here's the one counter I will say. What drives, and let's harken our inner Adam Harstead here. What really drives your probabilities of winning a championship?
Getting a bye.
Right. So not having a quarterback that you can flex may be just enough margin that you go from a 2 seed to a 4 seed. If you're on track especially if you're talking 8 games, if you're talking 6 or 4, or you start lowering the number, then I think it's easier to do what you're saying and just I'm going to float it, or maybe I have a quarterback starter, or if I don't, whatever. But if you start going 8, I mean, that's more than half the regular season, fantasy regular season. And that to me, I don't know. And if it's shallower rosters, that's the other thing. Like you said, if you only have really 2 starting quarterbacks, it might be more shallow. And then you may not be able to roster backups before they actually get clarity
Right.
and it may be a tighter scenario. So I would weigh all those options, but you brought up a couple things that I think the average person pivoting or thinking this way would not maybe have in their little Rolodex there on 1.0 thoughts.
Sure.
Yeah, there you go. Next bit of news: Rob Gronkowski retires. Honestly, I figured he's going to make another run. So we'll see until he signs a broadcasting contract or something like that, because you can always come back. Let's ask Jason Witten. Let's ask others that you could always return to action. But Gronkowski out means at present it's Cameron Brate, it's Cade Otton, and who knows? There's still a couple notable names out there in free agency.
Yeah, I instantly was like, let's read the statement and see if they use the keywords of retirement and the things from the Brady thing that weren't in there, right? But I do think that this is probably an actual retirement. Again, could he come back next year? Maybe, but it doesn't really make sense for him to announce a retirement right now. I've seen people say he's trying to skip training camp and stuff. It doesn't really make sense because he wasn't under contract. So, so we'll see how all that goes. I do think Braid's an interesting one, watching maybe how they address the position. Maybe it opens up some opportunity for Otton or whatever. I'm not going to cut him until I absolutely have to. It'd probably be sometime near the beginning of the season, especially if it's kicker defense, stuff like that on your team. I'm fine, just keeping him until like the last minute until I absolutely have to make one of those decisions. And then doing that, and otherwise, I think you can probably afford to keep him on your roster until you're trimming down on the injury away running back guys as the season gets closer.
Yeah, I think Brate's officially interesting. I know it's been a while since he had one of those fantasy relevant seasons, but you remember with Jameis Winston, some touchdown infused, good in the red zone guy. I know now he's like 30, but Brady, especially with Chris Godwin out, I mean, I think this looks good for Russell Gage early on and just consolidating targets a little bit that Gronk would otherwise populate. And the other thought I had was, I think Jimmy Graham is done personally. I've seen him erode to like barely playing in the red zone, and he probably runs a 4.9. So he's not really on my radar, but the guy still floating out there, friend of Chad and Jordan, is Jared Cook. Jared Cook's probably the most notable guy out there, but you probably need Brate and Otton to use a lot of the blocking abilities. And then, Jared Cook would be a glorified split out sort of wide receiver-ish sort of player. So he's the one that's still out there a little bit. I think all these guys in the radius, though, two tight end, you really got to be relatively sticky. And that's why Jared Cook, if he's out there in a two tight end per se, maybe you pick him up on spec. This is the type of thing that you got to be out in front of for, not spending big. And the moment he signs, he's going to go for decent money and a decent part of your capital. So yeah, I agree with you on Gronk. I mean, in a one tight end, there's enough upside that, unless it's an ironclad broadcasting deal that makes it so he's not coming back or something like that, like you need more action than this or pressure on the roster spot closer to the season before you start moving on. Also, let's talk about roster cloggers, our featured topic this
Mike
week.
Evans to the moon. Mike Evans to the moon.
To the moon. But hashtag no upside. No,
he's
upside.
Old, right? Hashtag he's
old and no upside left.
Yeah, right.
I mean, all he does is catch touchdowns. All he does is. Did he have a game where it was like 2 catches, 2 yards, and 2 touchdowns or something like it?
As if it's a bad thing.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Being the red zone du jour with Gronkowski out of the picture. Oh, Fournette and Evans, 30 touchdowns total. Let's get some.
All the touchdowns.
All right. So I was going to ask you to start off here about Dynasty roster cloggers, Jordan, because I don't know how many times over 100 plus shows we've talked about it. I think we've mentioned it in passing. I don't know if we've actually done a full, what's your definition and, what's that role in Dynasty look like? So let's break down for a few minutes, just roster cloggers. We can give some examples and why they're so detrimental to your Dynasty team and function.
Yeah, and this is, Chad and Jordan from 5 years ago have a different conversation about this topic than Chad and Jordan right now, right? So this is a lesson that
makes me cry 5 years ago because he mentions the player that's actually in the image of the. I think a lot of people might look at the banner for the show this week and be like, who is that?
Right. Is it Robert Tonyan? It's Jeff Janis. And this is back from a period of time where we were like, hey, let's be developmental wide receivers. Let's be sort of playing longer term plays at the receiver position, and lots of
hit
young
big.
guys.
Future
big,
alpha, Jeff Janis.
Right, hit big from deep, and through a lot of research, and I think a lot of scar tissue that is developed, we've realized that that's really not the best probability bet, right? That's not really the thing that can win you championships. And so I actually, I think there's a couple of things outside the top 10 rounds of your startup draft. You really need to be thinking about players in a couple of different contexts. They either need to be guys you're going to stream in your lineup, right? That's sort of the consideration that you have them. They're going to be backups that are really injury away types, right? And so whether that's being a quarterback that you find to be particularly interesting in super flex, a running back, something like that. Maybe it's there might be developmental guys that are in that range as well. They might be some rookie guys in that range as well, some day 2 rookies, maybe at tight end, something like that. Those guys can sort of fit in there too. And then after that, it's really a category of guys that you think is going to be uptick in value guys, right? So really guys that you're viewing as assets. I don't think there's a ton of them. The dynasty marketplace thinks everyone is. I think there's a handful of them, but guys that you're trying to think of really, hey, these guys could really go up in valuation over the next, 6 to 9 months, something like that. But outside of that, anyone else that's not sniffing your roster, that's not really sniffing an upside valuation play, and that doesn't have a clear injury away role, they're just clogging your roster. A lot of it's wide receivers, a lot of it's, developmental tight ends and the like from day 3 of the draft, those types of guys, day 2 quarterbacks, for example. A lot of those guys are really just clogging up your roster because they don't have a chance to really help you in the near term. And that's something as you get further down the line in your roster, especially outside the top, 10 to 15 rounds. Outside of that, those guys either need to help you in your lineup or help you from a roster construction perspective. Otherwise, they're just sitting there and not helping you at all.
Yeah, that's a great definition. Well said. And I think wide receiver is the main one. And at some point in your startup draft, and you can almost feel it when it happens, that you pretty much have to shift straight over to running back because there's so many wide receivers that can tempt you. And I was trying to think of, new Jeff Janis type players that might suck you in. Whether it's, they flashed a little bit, but they're buried. And, one guy I came back to, and it's not quite Jeff Janis level of like people going out of their minds that this might be, the next big thing or something. But Tyler Johnson, was one that made some plays. I remember in the postseason, was it 2 years ago? And it was like, oh, he's going to elevate, and now be the number 2 or number 3. And obviously Russell Gage coming in, Chris Godwin coming back. I mean, this offseason should have put a lot of cold water onto that theory. And Tyler Johnson, who's to say he can't play? But a lot of times day 3 wide receiver is the biggest trap. I will say, I even looked at another list going like, is Diami Brown? He's technically day 2, but what do? They keep bringing in more guys with more pedigree or bringing back guys. Are you going to tell yourself a story if Terry McLaurin, holds out Diami Brown season? No. So right. You have to be really careful even about day 2 guys, where I would say the wide receivers that are relatively safe are round 1 guys and then elite pedigree, elite profile guys from day 2. And you're still selective within that bucket. And even if they're not startable, you say there's developmental, as you said, market conditions, or I can see them at any point kind of rising up, cream rising to the top and being a lineup viable option for me in that developmental stage or embryo type fostering, while they're not all the way home. And yeah, unless it's 2 tight end, you got to be, I think, super careful about having too many tight ends. Quarterback, not so much. I don't know. I don't think in a start 1, very many people have a lot of roster cloggers. But I will say, just roster allocation, you start getting 3-4 quarterbacks in a start 1, you got to be really sensitive to what the roster size is. And it better start with a 3, because if you're in the 20s, it's like, what are we doing here? And so that's a whole separate discussion of doing rookie drafting strategy and what's the best player and what's your exit strategy for all this type stuff. But wide receiver is the big one. You can just list guys: Brian Edwards, Josh Palmer, KJ Osborne. I'm listing a lot of guys that have, Denzel Mims. Like, where's the end game with these guys? Right. And if you're going to make one exception, limit it to 1. Like, okay, sorry, I went to college with James Washington. I know the guy can ball. I love him. And now what if Michael Gallup is out? And like all these specific situations, okay, make James Washington your one guy And I don't think either one of us would have a problem if we were coaching somebody. We'd be like, okay, you got a guy. I'm not. It's Dynasty. It's your team. Like,
Right.
I don't want to talk you out of one of your favorite players, but don't tell me you got 5 favorite players. You can't do that. So there's just a laundry list, and wide receiver is the easy one of like, really? Do you think they're going to be a number 1 or a dominant number 2 on a team's depth chart? Like, soon? And if the answer is no, it's amazing. You can just go through Dynasty rosters and sometimes find 4, 5, 6 roster clogging players.
Yeah, and I'll say the other thing too. I'll just pivot off of what you said a little bit. Those round 1 or those high pedigree round 2 guys, those day 2 guys that have really, really good profiles. Those are the guys. Those are the core young guys that you want to have. But one thing that I've really taken to is I'm not as sticky as I was a while ago. Right, like I am not. If you don't do it in a year, or really if it's
positive signs, yeah, it's
a
a 2-year window, yeah.
Right, if you haven't really been successful in 2 years,
the N'Keal Harry rule,
right? Go someplace else. And honestly, I think one of the things that I found in Dynasty, I think I don't like to make a ton of bets on wide receivers, young ones, because it's a place that as a marketplace we haven't got better than random. There's a ton of factors that we don't control. It's a really hard place to get it right. It's a 50-50 bet at best. One of the things that I have done when I do take the bet is I sort of view it as, hey, I'm going to store this asset. And they typically don't depreciate a big deal in price if you're going to take a first-round wide receiver. Again, I don't take a ton of them. But if they're going to be cheap and I'm going to take them, and then you can always flip them next year.
Be more open to just basically observe and report for the first year, and then next January, February, you're gonna have options, and it 100%. May be a little lower, but it's not through the floor. Yeah, that's something this offseason I've really looked at a lot more, is like how much more discerning should we be, and what lens should we be looking if you actually have a rookie pick and you select a player. It doesn't mean you don't collect a lot of picks, but yeah, if you actually select a guy, like, how discerning should we be, and what lens should you focus? Because otherwise, again, to assume this whole assumption that even if a player is, it costs 108, and then they come out and they show positivity in year 1, and you're like, okay, I feel more comfortable with this. I'm open to possibly buying this player. Are they really going to cost a lot more than 108 the next year? You just like kind of shift. I mean, if they cost 105, you're just paying it in a different class. And frankly, I think that might be the better way to go, of being like, well, I've avoided the catastrophic bust. Like, I feel confident that that's not happening. So I'm happy to pay a little more. The confidence, the sleep at night factor is better. Now, we probably still wouldn't be out there buying second-year wide receivers that finished at wide receiver 42 or whatever, but we feel a lot better about that than if they come out, do a bunch of nothing, and it's like, well, now that 108, you can, if you still like them or whatever, I mean, maybe you can buy them for 205. Maybe you can buy them for 208. But even if you bought and it turned out horribly, what you're saying is, well, I can still get out. Like, I can still probably get a second plus for that player, and being open to saying, didn't work out as I thought. I don't like the optics here. And now the insulation training wheels are officially off.
Yeah, totally. And I think navigating those situations is something that I think it can be really tough to measure, right? It can be really tough to say, all right, here's some of the profile things in terms of how the market exactly moves and the like. But I do think, just as a general rule of thumb, if you get through the first year and the guy costs the same and he hasn't really broken out, that's a good time to just churn the asset over. And if you want to do it again, do it again. But I think that that's really the way to kind of play these guys, so they're not clogging your roster and becoming depreciating assets. At least they're staying the same.
And at that point in time, another option is you might be able to add a second to that player and get someone who's an auto start that's 28.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
You still have so you kick the tires. Hey, I tried to get a Justin Jefferson. I tried to get an Odell Beckham. I tried to get something that was overt in what happened and what we saw in year 1, or at least on that path. Didn't happen, but now I can still go a 2-for-1 and get something I actually like down the line, instead of drafting another one. And now you're sitting on both guys and you're like, I'm going to be so smart. God, I'm going to have the youngest wide receiver core in the room.
Right.
Yeah, it doesn't always work out there. All right. Do you want to shout out? This is episode 109 of the Footballguys Dynasty Show with Chad Parsons, Jordan McNamara. And you want to look like a champion with all that Football Guys official gear and merch. You got that Black Eyed Joe logo. They're constantly adding to the store there at shop.footballguys.com. You got hats, shirts, outerwear, coffee cups, everything that's quality materials and designs. Jordan can vouch for it. And you know what? We need like a hunting jacket with the log cabin that you're recording from this week. You need the Football Guys tweed, or like that hunting hat with the ear warmers there up at the Cape.
The Elmer Fudd hat.
Yeah. The Elmer Fudd Football Guys Black Eyed Joe hat. That's exactly what we need. And again, a reminder for everyone: thanks so much if you have been rating or reviewing us on your podcasting platforms, out on our own stream, and all of those good vibes for supporting and saying positive things about the show. Definitely help us now that we are out from under the very warm and protective wing of the Audible. So you're going to be seeing a lot more different streams out there. So your favorite, including this show, Football Guys shows, make sure you're subscribing to them so you're up on all the new episodes. And again, giving us a nice rating as well. Let's get to some dynasty trades this week. Got a few good ones. I wanted to start off super spicy, which is Kyle Pitts. And I'm very interested to see. Most of the time I have a sense of what you're going to say and where you're going to side. I don't in this one, though, because it's one tight end, no frills. So we get super flex to boost the picks. And here we go. Kyle Pitts for Pat Freiermuth, 202 and a 23 first.
Give me Pitts. The reason you could pitch me on this deal taking the other side of it is if it wasn't Freiermuth. I don't think Freiermuth has this big upside. I think that the market is overvaluing Freiermuth. In the format, you have to be very careful about overvaluing Pitts, because even if he's good, very good for a long time, it's not a huge edge to have a top 3 tight end over the possibility of getting another elite running back or an elite quarterback with that pick, without that premium really racking up at the top. So that's just the one thing that I'd be careful of. And again, if Pitts doesn't really have, in theory, he has tight end 1 overall in his range of outcomes, but if he's more realistically living in the 3 to 6 range, it's not a huge difference in terms of someone that you could trade down to. I think Goddard could be, the same type of player if he got some of the higher volume as well. So that would sort of be the thought process that I would have on this. I would hold Pitts. I don't mind the pivot, but I just wouldn't do it for Freiermuth, just because I think Freiermuth lacks.
Yeah, I think if I were to try to bait you into the other side, if that's Dalton Schultz or Goddard, that would probably get you closer, right?
If it was Goddard, I'd probably say yes.
Yeah, because again, no frills, and like you said, the ceiling is really, really important here. And I kind of think about Pitts and where he stands on what if this situation occurs. And I think this is a realistic outcome. Mark Andrews, beast, and there he is. But Kittle edging closer to 30. Kelsey already passed there. Waller hitting 30 right around when the season starts. And what if Hawkinson doesn't take a step forward? That a lot of assumption is he'll be right there. That Pitts for the next few years could have a vice grip on it's him and everybody else. And he doesn't necessarily have to finish at tight end 1 to do that with just some of these attrition aspects. So I just kind of wonder if almost de facto, if he's just very good, that if he's going to have this huge tidal wave edge over the position. But I'm the same way. I think Freiermuth, didn't he average less than 10 yards a catch? Like in year 1, and now you have questions maybe about the quarterback and is there going to be a big touchdown ceiling? So I think that's my big limitation. 202 could be Jahan Dotson, and then that 23 first could make the whole deal worthwhile. But I wish 202 maybe was a little higher, or Freiermuth, like you said, if it was Goddard. For me, even if Schultz, provides one good season right here, where it's like he's close or even higher than Pitts, then I think that levels it. Once you get to the pick, now if Pitts blows up and has 7 touchdowns and kind of equal stuff, he's going to be in the top 3 or so. Pretty easily with even just that touchdown regression aspect. But yeah, Freiermuth, I think in a 1 tight end doesn't move the needle much at all.
No.
All right, let's talk some super flex, and we're trading around QBs, all of which we have big time questions about. But at least you're getting 2 in one of the sides, which is Justin Fields, Zach Wilson, and 109 for Trey Lance and 105.
You know me very, very well, Chad, when you say that at least you're getting multiple of one of the sides. That's the side we're taking. And,
all right.
I mean, and listen, I don't, I have people call me Chicken Little on Trey Lance. I have concerns still, and we still have our friend out there doing the has Jimmy Garoppolo been traded yet? And the answer
I forgot to check that feed today. Did he get traded? Is he still on the roster?
He's still on the roster.
Still there.
So he's still there. So I have questions about all these guys? Yeah. But I think if I'm going to have questions about all of them, I might as well take the side where I'm getting two of them instead of one of them. Right. I mean, that's to me, that's an easy bet. Right. And I think that's the better probability aspect. And again, if you sort of put these guys in a blender and they came out in any order, it shouldn't be terribly surprising for us because that's what history has shown us. Right, we've seen a ton of variance. We've seen a ton of unpredictability out of those top 10 quarterbacks. We include Fields in that because of the class last year's. It's just outside of that, but I sort of include him in that tier. The ordering of that's really tough to get right, especially for guys that aren't number one. And I think when that's the case, you take two bets instead of one, and that would sort of be my position. I don't think you're losing much by sliding down in the round either.
Yeah, and 5 to 9, you might be missing out on your preferred wide receiver du jour, but 9 can be a sliding. I've seen Jameson Williams fall to 9, and especially if it comes out, I think just today or yesterday, talking about how maybe it's an October release date for him or November pup list, all this kind of stuff, and that's probably going to shade. If you're doing a July August rookie draft, it might affect him by a couple spots. Worst case 9 would be, James Cook or Pickens or Jahan Dotson or, insert player that is he really that far away from 5 unless some outlier guy falls like a Kenneth Walker or something like that. That would be the one thing I would say is that if you get Kenneth Walker falling to 5, that would be probably something that would affect it for me, but unlikely in most of the drafts that occurs. And Fields, big time rushing upside compared to Trey Lance, and Zach Wilson, the cheapest of this bucket. And yet, look what the Jets did. They built around him in a solid fashion, the opposite of Fields. So I think you get two bets there. All right, we got one more. FFPC Superflex, so very, very tight. We get Matt Ryan traded for Kadarius Toney and a 23 third.
Yeah, this one, it was interesting, and I'd be curious why the people made it. Right, I think if you're looking at to try and get out of some depth at quarterback, and you sort of have a little bit of a clogged situation, there's some caps in terms of just the number of quarterbacks you can roster.
Doesn't this clog you at wide receiver, though? I mean, to some degree.
It does clog you at wide receiver. The one thing I would say about this is I think if you take on Kadarius Toney, you have the ability to get a high-end outcome. And if you look at what he did as a rookie, the type of production that he did, very low sample size. He ran 197 routes. It's not that many routes. So that caveat aside, but when you look at what he did in terms of the amount of the routes that he was targeted on and the yards with which he produced on those routes, that's an elite looking profile. So I will say, if you're going to take a shot on a deeper sort of quote roster clogger type wide receiver who we just railed on for the first 10 minutes of the show there, this is the type of profile that you take a bet on. And so I don't necessarily have a problem with it with this specific player. I don't typically like these types of trades, but with this specific player, assuming that you're dealing from some depth at quarterback or something like that, I don't hate it.
Yeah, I'm trying to think back. It's been a while since we've done in-season FFPC management, but I remember thinking that 3 quarterbacks is pretty comfy and pretty easy to do, and frankly, near mandatory. Because there's not a lot of starters that just float out to the waiver wire unencumbered. And I think even if Matt Ryan somehow is your QB4, that it's still doable. Like, I don't think it's I have to shed this roster spot by week 1 when I start managing my team. It probably means you have roster cloggers more at wide receiver and, maybe some excess fat elsewhere, maybe an excess tight end that doesn't really look all too good. But man, yeah, we I just find it hard to believe that Matt Ryan, who has some upside, like I actually think it's a nice situation in Indy, and it's not someone that you should run from. That to me, it's a little bit. I mean, I can't imagine having 5 starters, and if you have 4, I still don't think it's something that you need to run from this quickly. Even though acknowledge and recognize the upside Kadarius Toney could provide.
Sure. And this is a good, can we harken back? I know it's not probably exactly the format we were talking about before, but this is an interesting comparison to that Watson discussion we had, right? Because if you could solve quarterback in a situation like this, not terribly costly, right? It's not making a huge dent in your overall odds. That's a good way to do it. But when you have to give up bigger pieces, right? When you have to give up future picks or really core assets at some of your other starting positions to address someone that's one or two or three tiers higher than Ryan is, especially in a trade like this, right? That's, I think, much more costly to your overall outcome. So this is to sort of pair with that conversation, I think is a good way to think about it.
Yeah, well done on the team acquiring Matt Ryan. They might have a legitimate QB2 question. And I think this solves it over probably a multi-year window really well, so that you're not scrambling. And frankly, you're not using a lot of time, attention, and waiver dollars that you probably spend elsewhere in this 20-man. Instead of spending it on quarterback, you can spend it at running back.
Yes.
All right, let's get to some quotes from the Dynasty Forum this week. I want to remind you about the email update on a daily basis called by Joe Bryant. All the news and analysis we mentioned, Deshaun Watson, Rob Gronkowski. You don't want to go more than a few hours without knowing the news of the day, and you get that every single day. Your league mates are probably getting it. You do not want to be left behind with the analysis you need from Football Guys and the great staff. So let's get to quotes from the Dynasty Forum. And for the first time in my league history, not one first round trade was made through 10 picks. So they're referencing the annual draft. And have you noticed that there's been less activity, more, or about the same as usual this year in just your leagues at large?
I think this rookie class has been a little bit different. People have generally told me they've had a harder time trading. I haven't had that same problem because I've been willing to go to different places that other people aren't willing to do in terms of some of my trades. So I've been more open to being aggressive on the getting a trade done side. But I would say I think it's been down a little bit in terms of some of the trade stuff. I think this time of year is particularly tough too. I think a lot of people are not tuning out, but paying less attention right now. So I think that's another time, if you're having a draft right now, that can be an issue as well. But I do think activity's been a little bit lower, and people are not like stuck in their house and, just in front of their computer all the time as we were for 2 straight years.
Yeah.
Right.
And yeah, a lot of times trades don't get done, and it doesn't mean that people aren't trying. It doesn't mean that people aren't sending offers. It just means there's not agreement there. And what I will say is there's a lot of, I always find it interesting because in late April or coming out of the draft, I kind of have this feel every year, because when I'm putting together my own draft board and starting to look at some real draft results, like you always go into it being like, well, I don't know what's going to happen, like in terms of how it's going to settle, how the board is going to look. And then by the time, it's funny, by the time you get to Monday or Tuesday of that week after the NFL draft, you're like, oh yeah, there's and people start to do paint by number for the next 2 weeks, and things might shift a little bit, but by later May or early June. But it's amazing that I don't know if it's part sheeple, that the sheep just start following around, or if it's like everybody is just kind of thinking similarly in those buckets or the tier breaks or the general flow of what players go in what ranges, outside of a few that could go maybe a round gap in the second round, third round, some reaches, things like that you don't see in other drafts. So I think this year though, I mean, it's kind of, I think if you're not at 1, and we have a pretty good indication of Breece Hall at 1, then I think a lot of people are just generally happy where they are. Or in general, people might be looking to move down. There's not as much pressure for people trying to move up, is what I would say, to pay the piper. It's more flatter. And that's probably one of the bigger reasons if in your particular league you aren't seeing as much trading. Some people can't wait for 2+ years to get their payoff or value the assets they have that won't mature until then. So they're referencing people that trade picks pretty far out, people that just can't wait sometimes for those picks to come and fully realize their value. So they want to get that instant gratification and maybe make a trade for something that helps them now.
I mean, you got to be careful doing that. I do think I've had really good success about being very patient on taking future picks. I would caveat that with, I don't give what I would consider difference-making players in those deals. I've talked about, I think on this show before, where I was trying to trade Damian Williams in the Damian Williams era when he was the thing in Kansas City. I tried to get a future first. It took me like 8 months of that Damian Williams window, which was like 10 months long. I tried for like 8 months to get a future first. And ultimately I had to wait 2 years out, right? I had to wait, I went through an entire rookie draft cycle. I think I had to go 2 more out was the way it went. I think it was the fall of 2019 and I got a 2021 first, I think is what I did. And, I was willing to be patient because I didn't think that Damian Williams is a big time difference maker long-term. Right. What I would caveat people to not do is make that trade when it's a guy that's actually really helpful. Right. So, where you actually got a guy that's, whether it's in your lineup or where is it a core asset or even a high-end contributing asset, something like that, and just trade him for picks 2 years from now. Right. I think that's the wrong way to go about it. Right. Do that. Be on the side where you're really selling immediate hope to somebody, not selling off, long-term odds for that immediate gratification.
Yeah, I think you got to be very careful. There's always times where you can find really good value with your future capital. I'm usually pretty hesitant. I will say the stronger the team I am and the better deal I have, the more open I am to selling future picks. And generally, I only like to go as far as the known goes, which is the following year, and especially in season. I've been more open to that in the last year or so than I have been at any other time, because you get mid-season and you're looking like a buy, and you can supplement your team with an auto start player and a profile that you trust for multiple years, and you got teams selling, and you know what they want. I want that upside guy. I want that first. And again, that can be a true win-win scenario where they shed points, you get points, you make your team even stronger, and then they're going to end up, the predictability factor. They are going to get a later first because you already have data points of the current year that you're pretty much locked in. They're giving you someone to even help you and push that pick even later. Clyde Edwards-Helaire is polarizing. The ceiling hasn't been there, but he's been hurt a lot. I expect Edwards-Helaire to bounce back relative to his value. He hasn't been healthy, and Kansas City is loaded. He's going to eat in PPR leagues. I'm waiting for the Jordan smirk. If he stays healthy, meaning like low running back one, and he's going to be running back one if he gets the goal line work. A lot of ifs.
I think yes. I think it's fair to say he's maybe undervalued. It's maybe fair to say as well that his outcome from that range is a lot wider or a lot higher. Right, there might be fat tails in his range of outcomes that don't exist in other ones. Right, if you're the number one running back in an Andy Reid offense, it's quarterbacked by Patrick Mahomes that has questions at wide receiver. Could you have an outstanding season? You could. Right. So that would be, as opposed to some of other guys in his range, something that they don't possess that he does. I've always been dubious of the high level receiving profile that's been attached to him, right? This high level receiver. He has never really been that. He wasn't particularly efficient or effective in college either. He hasn't been in the NFL. I think this is the most anti-Jordan thing that I might have ever said, but I almost wonder if Ronald Jones isn't the right answer to this question. The problem with Ronald Jones is he's everything that I don't like about a running back, in the sense of I don't know if he can actually win you and make a huge, huge difference because he doesn't have the receiving profile. But if you want to look at a team that has a really good run blocking unit and their offensive line, that has done some stuff with their offensive line that's actually counterintuitive to what they actually do, but it's developed them into having a very good run blocking offensive line. And they sort of wanted to combat what teams were doing against them last year by using Ronald Jones, who, again, I can't believe I'm saying this, has been better than we thought coming out of college. That would be something that would be, I think, possible. However, I don't know the upside of it, right? So I think the upside play in the backfield is probably Clyde Edwards-Helaire. But if you told me that Ronald Jones was this year's version of Damian Harris, that wouldn't shock me in the least.
Yeah, just to go through a few things here. One thing I track, I've dubbed it now Helo score because it's just a little easier to say, but high leverage opportunities for running backs that looks at goal line looks, and it also looks at targets.
Can we
Kansas
put
City.
Halo? Can we make that Halo? Like
Halo?
the angel? Yeah, we need to get a Halo on Alexander Madison for the label.
There we go. And homage to Latavius Murray and Madison.
Yes.
But it was with the Chiefs, the last couple years, running back 15 and 17 each of those years. So middle of the pack at best. When you say, oh, big time offense, those were the 2 years Edwards-Helaire has been there. They were 16 before that. So not much change. They haven't been in the top 10 of goal line or targets at the position. So is it going to happen magically with Tyreek Hill not there and with Ronald Jones in that number 2 role? They bring back Jerick McKinnon, so it's not exactly barren behind Edwards-Helaire with no Darrell Williams. So that's the part for me is he going to overachieve the opportunities he is given? Because that's the indicator here. For him to be a running back 1, he kind of has to overachieve the optimal looks he's getting within that offense. So color me skeptical that but here's the pivot. So here's me both talking out of both sides of my mouth. Round 1 running backs, and this was insightful for me, that a lot of their extra hit rate beyond lower drafted guys is year 3 and beyond. It's not really the first couple of years. So Edwards-Helaire now enters the prime zone later in his rookie contract where round 1 guys still get a lot of allegiance. And frankly, round 2, round 3, round 4 guys may not be getting as much allegiance. It's kind of like been there, done that. We might be moving on. We may have drafted over the top of you by this point. And Edwards-Helaire, running back 25 to 30, very palatable. And I feel like even if you don't like him, it's almost like what Jordan said about Ronald Jones. Like, depending on the price and depending on situationally, like how it looks, you can still be in on a guy that you maybe don't fully trust. And so I don't trust Edwards-Helaire, but the entire profile of when do guys break out, round 1 allegiance, and you say, Ronald Jones, does he really scare you a lot? Is Ronald Jones going to be the pass catching guy? So I think all things considered with Edwards-Helaire, it could have been far worse. I mean, I think Darrell Williams there would have been far worse this year. And it's strange to say that over Ronald Jones, a former top 50 pick, but Ronald Jones is not shown to have high PPR acumen, and there's targets available and uncertainty without Tyreek Hill for the first time in quite some time in that offense. So, so I think Edwards-Helaire, if you told me he's running back 17 or something, like pricey, and that's dicey. So, but when you're talking about 25 to 30, I think very palatable. And he's one of those 2 years removed. I mean, I still remember the week 1. He runs for 150 yards, couple touchdowns. Yeah, right. Look at this. And the interesting thing was 0 catches or something.
Right.
And but he goes up for 20 plus points, and it's like wow, here's the start of things. Yeah. Be like, I'm glad I spent 110 on a startup on him. Like, it was kind of the feeling at that point in time. So I just feel like it's been a while since we've had overt optimism, but that's the post-hype sleeper profile and theory here, I think, fully applies.
Yeah, totally with you on that.
All right. Busy show. Got to talk about all the different positions here through trading, the vehicle of roster cloggers, and talking about Deshaun Watson and Rob Gronkowski. We're actually getting movement and news that is affecting our week 1 and 2022 prospectus here for the dynasty rosters. And that means we're getting close. It feels like we're only a few shows away from legitimately having training camp on into the preseason. And now we're running at full speed by that point. All right. So that's going to do it this week. And until next time, good luck in your dynasty leagues.